The dim glow of the control room cast long shadows across the battered hull of Captain Ethan Carter's warship. The war was over, or at least, that's what they told him. Treaties had been signed, and the Galactic Council proclaimed an end to years of bloody conflict. Yet for soldiers like Ethan, the scars of battle were not so easily erased. Docked on a neutral station for debriefing, Ethan sat stiffly in a chair, his uniform still smeared with soot from the final skirmish. He was here to receive his reward. It sounded more like a punishment. A grizzled officer entered, a tablet in hand. "Captain Carter, your service has been recognized," the officer said without much emotion. "As part of the post-war reclamation, certain assets have been redistributed. You've been assigned one." Ethan frowned. "Asset?" The officer gestured toward the doorway, where a figure hesitated before stepping into view. She was unlike anyone Ethan had ever seen. Her skin was pale blue, almost like the light of a distant star, and her white hair fell like silk down her back. She looked young, barely an adult by human standards, but her violet eyes carried a depth of pain that seemed ancient. "This is Liara," the officer said flatly, "a former slave of the enemy faction. As per treaty terms, she's been freed, but she requires a legal guardian until she can establish her independence." Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the metal floor. "Guardian? What is this?" "She's a person, not a thing to be assigned." The officer sighed, as if he'd had this argument too many times. "It's protocol, Captain. You were selected based on your record. Take it up with the council if you have an issue." He handed over the tablet. "Sign here." Ethan looked at Liara, who stood silently, her arms crossed tightly as if to shield herself from the world. She wasn't trembling, but there was a guardedness about her, a readiness to flinch that spoke volumes. He signed the tablet reluctantly. "Fine, but I'm not treating her like some asset. She's free, and she'll stay that way under my care." The officer shrugged, not caring one way or the other. "Do what you want. Just make sure she doesn't cause trouble." He left without another word, leaving Ethan and Liara standing in awkward silence. Ethan scratched the back of his head, unsure of what to say. Liara, is it?" She nodded once, her expression unreadable. "Look, I don't know what you've been through," he said carefully, "but I promise I'm not like those people who hurt you. You don't owe me anything. You're free to go wherever you want." Her violet eyes met his for the first time, sharp and suspicious. "And what happens if I leave? Where would I even go?" Her voice was soft, but it carried a bitter edge. Ethan hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, especially for someone like her. "You're right. It's not safe out there yet. How about this? You stay with me until you figure out what you want to do. No strings attached." Liara studied him for a long moment, as if searching for a hidden agenda. Finally, she nodded. "Fine, but don't expect me to trust you." "That's fair," Ethan said, his lips quirking into a faint smile. "Trust isn't built in a day." As they walked back to the ship, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this unexpected assignment was more than just bureaucratic nonsense. Liara was a survivor of horrors he couldn't begin to imagine. And somehow, amidst the wreckage of war, their paths had crossed. What lay ahead for them was uncertain, but one thing was clear: neither of their lives would ever be the same. The faint hum of the ship's engines filled the quiet as Ethan guided it away from the neutral station. Liara sat in the co-pilot's seat, her posture stiff and her gaze fixed out the viewport. She hadn't said much since they boarded, and Ethan didn't push her. He could feel the weight of her silence, heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Hungry?" he asked, breaking the quiet. Liara turned her head slightly, studying him. "Are you trying to make conversation, or are you actually concerned?" Ethan chuckled, though her question wasn't particularly funny. "Can't it be both?" She didn't answer, but the corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. Ethan stood and gestured toward the small galley. "Come on. I don't know what you like, but I've got ration packs. Not great, but they'll keep you alive." Liara hesitated before following him. The galley was cramped, barely enough space for 2 people, but she perched on a stool, her eyes darting around as if memorizing every detail. Ethan slid a ration pack across the table. "You've got options, tasteless or slightly less tasteless." She picked up the pack, inspecting it cautiously. "Do you always joke this much?" "Only when I don't know what to say," he admitted, sitting across from her. For a while, they ate in silence. Ethan wanted to ask her a million questions about where she came from, what she'd been through, but he knew better than to push. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why did you sign that tablet?" Ethan looked up. Her violet eyes were locked onto his, sharp and searching. "I didn't have much of a choice," he said honestly. "But even if I did, I wouldn't have left you there. You've been through enough." Her gaze didn't waver. "Do you really think you can make this right? That you can fix what's been done to me?" Ethan leaned back, sighing. "I don't know, but I can promise I won't add to the damage." "That's a start, isn't it?" Liara set the ration pack down and folded her hands in her lap. For the first time, her voice softened. "You're different. Most people see me as a tool, something to use or discard. Why don't you?" "Because you're not a tool," Ethan said firmly. "You're a person, and you deserve better." The words hung in the air between them. Liara looked away, her expression unreadable, but Ethan thought he saw the smallest flicker of something, hope maybe. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp beep from the ship's console. Ethan stood, moving to check the comms. "Incoming message," he muttered, flipping the switch. A holographic figure appeared, a representative from the Galactic Council. "Captain Carter, a reminder. The individual under your care is your responsibility. Should she cause any disruption or harm, you will be held accountable." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's not a threat. She's a survivor. Maybe the Council should spend more time fixing the mess they created and less time giving me lectures." The representative's face remained impassive. "The rules are clear. Good day, Captain." The hologram flickered out. Liara had approached silently, standing behind him. "They'll never let me be free," she said quietly. Ethan turned to her, his expression resolute. "Then we'll prove them wrong." For the first time, Liara met his gaze without suspicion. There was still doubt in her eyes, but also a flicker of trust. Ethan gestured toward the co-pilot's seat. "Come on. Let's chart a course. The galaxy's big, and somewhere out there is a place where you can truly start over." Liara hesitated, then sat beside him. "I don't know if I believe that yet," she admitted. "That's okay," Ethan said with a small smile. "I'll believe enough for both of us." As the ship soared into the vast expanse of space, Liara couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, freedom wasn't as impossible as it seemed. The ship drifted through the quiet void of space, its engines humming softly as Ethan adjusted the course. Liara sat in the co-pilot's seat, her sharp eyes scanning the stars outside the viewport. She hadn't spoken much since they left the station, but Ethan could feel her presence, watchful and wary. He broke the silence, keeping his tone light. "You know, it's okay to relax. The ship doesn't bite." Liara glanced at him, unimpressed. "Relaxing isn't something I've had much practice with." Ethan nodded, understanding. He wasn't exactly relaxed either. Keeping her safe felt like a bigger responsibility than any battle he'd fought. "Fair enough," he said, "but you're not in danger here. No one's coming after you." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't know that." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but a sudden alarm cut him off. The console lit up, and a warning flashed across the screen. "Unidentified vessel approaching," the ship's AI announced. Ethan leaned forward, his fingers flying over the controls. "Let's see who's paying us a visit." The radar showed a small craft on an intercept course. Liara tensed beside him, her posture rigid. "That's not a friendly ship," she said quietly. Ethan frowned. "How can you tell?" It's the way they move. That's not a civilian pattern, she explained, her voice tight. Ethan didn't doubt her instincts. He adjusted the ship's shields and armed the defense systems. Buckle up. This might get bumpy. As the incoming vessel closed the distance, a hail came through. Ethan accepted it cautiously, and a grizzled alien face appeared on the screen. Captain Carter, the alien sneered. You have something that belongs to us. Ethan's jaw tightened. She doesn't belong to anyone. And if you're smart, you'll turn around and leave. The alien's grin widened, revealing sharp teeth. We don't leave without what we came for. Hand over the girl, and maybe we'll let you live. Liara's hand gripped the edge of her seat. Ethan glanced at her, his voice steady. Stay calm. I've got this. He cut the comms and accelerated the ship. The hostile craft gave chase, its weapons lighting up the dark. Evasive maneuvers, Ethan muttered, steering the ship into a sharp dive. The first volley of shots missed, but the second grazed their shields, shaking the entire vessel. Liara braced herself, her voice cutting through the chaos. You can't outrun them forever. Their ship is faster. Ethan grinned despite the situation. Good thing I'm not trying to outrun them. He flipped a switch, and the ship veered toward a nearby asteroid field. The jagged rocks loomed ahead, spinning in chaotic patterns. Liara's eyes widened. You're going in there. That's suicide. Not if you know what you're doing, Ethan said confidently. Hold on. The ship weaved through the asteroids, the hostile craft hot on their tail. Ethan's hands moved deftly over the controls, narrowly avoiding collision after collision. Liara watched, equal parts terrified and impressed. The enemy ship wasn't as lucky. A sharp turn sent it scraping against an asteroid, its shields flickering. Ethan seized the opportunity, firing a well-placed shot that disabled their engines. The hostile craft drifted helplessly, and Ethan guided his ship out of the field, breathing a sigh of relief. Liara stared at him, her expression unreadable. That was reckless, she said finally. Maybe, Ethan admitted, a small smile tugging at his lips. But it worked. She didn't respond, but there was a glimmer of respect in her eyes. As they set a new course, Liara leaned back in her seat, her tension easing slightly. You're not like anyone I've met before, she said quietly. Ethan glanced at her, his tone softening. Is that a good thing? Her gaze drifted to the stars outside. I'm not sure yet. For the first time since they'd met, the silence between them felt less heavy. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start. The ship cruised through the darkness of space, its exterior still scorched from the near miss in the asteroid field. Ethan sat at the controls, his fingers occasionally tapping the console to check the ship's systems. Beside him, Liara remained silent, her arms crossed as she stared at the endless stars outside. Ethan finally broke the quiet. We'll make a supply stop soon. You good with that? Liara nodded, but didn't look at him. As long as it's quick. Her clipped tone didn't surprise him. She'd been distant since their escape, though Ethan couldn't blame her. He knew trust didn't come easily to someone with her past. As they approached a small trade outpost, Ethan activated the ship's docking protocol. The station was unassuming, a floating hub of metallic platforms and flickering lights. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe, at least on the surface. Ethan turned to Liara. Stay close. This place attracts all kinds, and not all of them are friendly. She raised an eyebrow. You think I can't handle myself? I think trouble has a way of finding us, Ethan replied with a smirk. Together, they stepped off the ship, the station's bustling market stretching out before them. Merchants shouted over each other, hawking everything from alien fruits to salvage starship parts. Liara's eyes darted around, scanning the crowd. Ethan led the way to a supply stall, negotiating with the vendor for fuel cells and food packs. Liara stood nearby, her back straight and her posture tense. She felt exposed here, surrounded by strangers. Relax, Ethan said, glancing at her. You're with me. She didn't respond, but her eyes flicked to him briefly before returning to the crowd. Unbeknownst to them, a shadowy figure watched from the edge of the market. The figure spoke into a hidden calm, their voice low and urgent. "Target confirmed. She's with the human. Move in quietly." As Ethan finished the transaction, Liara's sharp instincts kicked in. She felt it before she saw it, the subtle shift in the crowd, the way certain individuals seemed to close in. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady but urgent. He turned just as a group of armed operatives emerged from the crowd, weapons drawn. "Captain Carter," one of them said coldly. "Hand her over. And no one gets hurt." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "I'm getting real tired of people saying that." Liara stepped closer to him, her voice low. "They're not bluffing. These aren't amateurs." "Neither are we," Ethan replied, his hand moving toward his concealed blaster. The first shot came from the operatives, narrowly missing them as Ethan pushed Liara behind a nearby stall. Chaos erupted in the market as bystanders fled, merchants scrambling to protect their goods. Ethan returned fire, his aim precise as he ducked behind cover. Liara grabbed a fallen weapon from the ground, her movements fluid and practiced. "You've done this before," Ethan remarked, impressed, as she fired a shot that disabled one of the attackers. "Unfortunately," she muttered, her focus unwavering. The firefight was short but intense. Ethan and Liara worked seamlessly, their combined skills overwhelming the operatives. When the last attacker fell, the market was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the station's generators. Ethan looked at Liara, who was still gripping the weapon, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. "You okay?" She nodded, though her expression was hard. "I told you they wouldn't stop coming." Ethan retrieved a small device from one of the operatives' belts, scanning it. "They were tracking us, probably since the asteroid field." Liara's jaw tightened. "So what now? Keep running?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "We don't run. We figure out who sent them and why." As they returned to the ship, Liara felt a strange mix of fear and determination. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting alone. And for reasons she couldn't yet explain, that gave her hope. The hum of the ship's engines filled the silence as Ethan guided it away from the trade outpost. The firefight in the market still played in his mind, each moment replaying with sharp clarity. Liara sat in the co-pilot's seat, her violet eyes distant, as though lost in a memory she didn't want to share. "We'll make a stop soon," Ethan said, his voice breaking the quiet. "There's a human colony nearby. Safe place to regroup." Liara didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her tone was guarded. "What makes it safe?" Ethan glanced at her. "It's small, off the main trade routes. People there are simple, honest. They don't care about politics or war." Liara's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her gaze. "We'll see." A few hours later, the ship landed on the outskirts of the colony. The settlement was modest, a scattering of buildings surrounded by fields of green, with children running through the streets and families tending to crops. The air was clean, and the sky was a brilliant shade of blue, unmarred by the pollution of larger worlds. Liara stepped out of the ship, her movements hesitant. She looked around, taking in the simplicity of the settlement. "This is where humans live?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Some of us," Ethan said, smiling. "Not every human is a soldier or a politician." As they walked through the colony, the locals greeted Ethan warmly, their smiles genuine. Liara stayed close to him, her posture stiff, but she couldn't help but observe the easy way the humans interacted. It was so different from the harshness she had known. They stopped at a small cafe where an older woman approached them, wiping her hands on her apron. "Ethan Carter," she exclaimed, her face lighting up. "What brings you back here?" "Just passing through, Mrs. Harper," Ethan said, his tone friendly. "This is Liara. She's traveling with me." Mrs. Harper's eyes softened as she looked at Liara. "Well, aren't you a pretty thing? You must be starving. Sit down. Both of you, I'll bring something out. Liara hesitated, her instincts telling her to refuse, but Ethan gestured toward a table. She's harmless, he said softly. Promise. Liara sat, her back straight, her eyes scanning the room. You trust her? She asked quietly. Ethan nodded. She's known me since I was a kid. People here aren't like the ones you've met before. Mrs. Harper returned with plates of steaming food, the smell making Liara's stomach growl despite her cautious demeanor. She picked at the meal, her movements deliberate, as though expecting a trick. You can relax, Ethan said, smiling. No one's out to get you here. Liara didn't reply, but she gradually started eating, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Around them, the colony's quiet buzz continued, children laughing, neighbors chatting, and the distant hum of machinery. Is this what humanity is like? Liara asked suddenly, her voice low. Ethan considered her question. Some of it. We're not perfect. We fight. We argue. But when it comes down to it, we look out for each other. That's what matters. She didn't answer, but he could see the wheels turning in her mind. As they left the cafe, a group of children ran past, one of them accidentally bumping into Lara. She froze, her muscles tensing, but the boy just laughed and waved. Sorry, miss, he called before darting away. Ethan watched her carefully. You okay? Lara blinked, the encounter clearly unexpected. He wasn't afraid of me, she said softly. Why would he be? Ethan asked. You're not a monster, Lara. You're just different. For the first time, she looked at him with something other than suspicion. It wasn't quite trust, but it was a step closer. As they headed back to the ship, Lara glanced at the peaceful colony one last time. For the first time in years, she felt a faint spark of something unfamiliar. The ship floated in the quiet of space, the stars outside twinkling like distant promises. Ethan leaned back in the pilot's chair, his mind replaying the day of the colony. Lara had been quieter than usual since they left, her violet eyes distant as she stared out the viewport. You've been awfully quiet, Ethan said, breaking the silence. Everything okay? Lara hesitated, her fingers tracing an invisible pattern on the armrest. Why did you take me in, Ethan? She asked softly, her voice carrying a weight he hadn't heard before. Ethan turned to her, surprised by the question. Because it was the right thing to do. You didn't deserve to be treated the way they treated you. No one does. She gave him a long look, her expression unreadable. You make it sound so simple. Sometimes it is, Ethan said. Not everything has to be complicated. Lara let out a small, bitter laugh. That's where you're wrong. My existence is complicated. You don't even know the half of it. Ethan's brow furrowed. Then tell me. If there's something I should know, I'm listening. For a moment, Lara didn't respond. Then, as if making a decision, she straightened in her seat. The people chasing me aren't just after me because I'm a former slave. They're after what I carry. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What you carry? She nodded, her expression serious. When I was in their custody, they implanted something in me, a message encoded and hidden in my memory. I don't know exactly what it is, but they made it clear it was important. They said I would never escape because of it. Ethan leaned forward, his mind racing. A message. Do you know who it's for? No, she admitted. I've tried to access it, but it's locked behind something I don't understand. All I know is that it's valuable enough for them to kill me to keep it from falling into the wrong hands. Ethan let out a low whistle. Well, that explains why they're so persistent. Lara looked at him, her eyes guarded. You don't have to stay involved, Ethan. This isn't your fight. He met her gaze without hesitation. It is now. You're not in this alone anymore. She seemed taken aback by his certainty, her guard slipping for a moment. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably a little of both, he said with a grin. But if there's one thing I know, it's that running won't solve anything. If we're going to deal with this, We need to figure out what's in that message. Liara hesitated, then nodded slowly. I think I know someone who might help. She's different, not entirely trustworthy, but she's brilliant with technology. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Where do we find her? She moves around a lot, Liara said. But the last time I heard about her, she was working out of a station in the Garros sector. It's risky, though. The people there won't be happy to see someone like me. Then we'll make them see reason, Ethan said confidently. Liara stared at him, her expression softening. You really don't give up, do you? Not when it matters, Ethan said. And this matters. As the ship changed course toward the Garros sector, Liara felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The secret she'd carried for so long was finally out, and for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. Ethan glanced at her, his smile reassuring. Whatever this message is, we'll figure it out together. I promise. Liara didn't reply, but a small spark of trust flickered in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, Ethan was someone she could finally rely on. The Garros sector loomed ahead, its vast network of stations and asteroid fields shrouded in mystery and danger. Ethan guided the ship carefully, his eyes scanning the displays for signs of trouble. Beside him, Liara was unusually quiet, her sharp gaze fixed on the distant lights of their destination. This contact of yours, Ethan began, breaking the silence. Are you sure she can be trusted? Liara hesitated before answering. Tala isn't trustworthy in the traditional sense, but she's brilliant. If anyone can unlock the message, it's her. Just be ready for her attitude. She doesn't work with people like us for free. Ethan smirked. Good thing I'm charming, then. Liara gave him a sidelong glance, her lips twitching in what might have been the start of a smile. We'll see how far that gets you. As they docked at one of the sector's more discreet stations, the air inside was thick with the scent of oil and metal. The station's inhabitants were a mix of scrappy traders, rogue engineers, and drifters, people who thrived on the fringes of the galaxy. Tala's workshop was tucked away in a far corner, marked by a glowing sign that read, No questions, no refunds. Ethan raised an eyebrow at the warning, but followed Liara inside. The interior was a chaotic mess of wires, tools, and half-assembled devices. In the center of it all stood Tala, a wiry woman with sharp features, neon green hair, and a smirk that suggested she knew more than she let on. Well, Tala said, her voice dripping with amusement. Liara, didn't think I'd see you again. Her eyes flicked to Ethan. And you've brought a friend. Cute. Ethan crossed his arms. We're not here to chat. Can you help us or not? Tala raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by his directness. Depends. What's the job? Liara stepped forward, her tone steady. I need you to unlock something. A message hidden in my memory. It's encrypted. Tala's smirk faded, replaced by genuine interest. Encrypted memory, huh? That's not child's play. What's in it for me? Ethan sighed, already frustrated by the back and forth. What do you want? Tala tapped her chin theatrically. Let's say, a favor. I do this for you, and someday when I call, you answer. No questions asked. Liara glanced at Ethan, her expression wary. She always has strings attached, she warned. We don't have much of a choice, Ethan said quietly. He turned to Tala. Fine. You've got a deal. Tala grinned and gestured to a chair surrounded by machinery. All right, Liara, sit. This won't hurt. Much. Liara rolled her eyes but obeyed, settling into the chair. Tala attached a series of small devices to Liara's temples and began typing furiously on a console. Interesting. Tala murmured as lines of code filled the screen. This encryption is military grade. Someone went to a lot of trouble to keep this hidden. Ethan watched anxiously as Tala worked, his hand resting on his blaster just in case. After several tense minutes, Tala leaned back with a triumphant grin. Got it. The message is unlocked. Liara's eyes fluttered open, her voice slightly groggy. What does it say? Tala pressed a button, and a holographic projection appeared, displaying coordinates and a single line of text. The key to the Empire's downfall lies within. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? Tala shrugged. Beats me. But whoever sent this message clearly thought it was important enough to bury in someone's brain. Before they could discuss further, an alarm blared through the station. Tala's smirk disappeared, replaced by a scowl. Looks like you've been followed. Better leave. Fast. Ethan grabbed Lyra's arm, helping her out of the chair. Let's go. As they raced back to the ship, Lyra's mind was spinning. The message's implications were staggering. If they could uncover its meaning, it might change everything. But first, they had to survive. The station's alarm blared loudly, drowning out the sound of their hurried footsteps. Ethan kept one hand on Lyra's arm as they wove through the crowded corridors, their pace quick but calculated. Behind them, the distant sounds of boots on metal echoed. Pursuers. They're gaining on us, Lyra said, her voice tight. Ethan glanced back, catching a glimpse of armed operatives pushing through the panicked crowd. Not for long. Tala, which way's the exit? Tala's voice crackled through a comm she'd handed him. Straight ahead, then take the service hatch to your right. And try not to wreck my station, all right? No promises, Ethan muttered, pulling Lyra toward the hatch. They ducked inside, the narrow passage barely wide enough for both of them. Lyra climbed first, her movements agile despite the urgency. Ethan followed, his blaster drawn as he glanced back to ensure they weren't followed. When they finally emerged into the docking bay, Ethan's ship was already surrounded by more operatives. He cursed under his breath, scanning the area for options. Any bright ideas? Lyra asked, crouching beside him. Ethan smirked. Always. He tapped his wrist console, remotely activating the ship's defense systems. A low hum vibrated through the air as the ship's mounted turrets powered up, swiveling to face their enemies. The operatives froze, their weapons trained on the ship. Attention. The ship's AI announced in a calm, almost cheerful tone. Hostile activity detected. Defensive measures will activate in 10 seconds unless you vacate the area. The operatives hesitated, clearly weighing their options. When one made a move toward the ship, the turrets fired a warning shot, hitting the ground just inches from his feet. That was enough to send them scattering. Nice work, Lyra said, impressed. Ethan grinned. Thanks. Now let's get out of here. They sprinted to the ship, and Ethan slammed the hatch shut behind them. As he powered up the engines, Lyra strapped into the co-pilot's seat, her hands steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. Coordinates? She asked. Ethan punched in the numbers from the holographic message. We're going to find out what this key is. The ship roared to life, lifting off the station's surface just as more operatives stormed into the docking bay. A few stray shots pinged harmlessly off the shields as they ascended, leaving the chaos behind. Once they were safely in open space, Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. That was closer than I'd like. Lyra looked at him, her expression thoughtful. You didn't have to come with me, you know. This isn't your fight. It is now, Ethan said firmly. You're not in this alone anymore, Lyra. Whatever this message leads to, we'll figure it out together. She didn't reply immediately, her gaze dropping to her hands. I've spent so long running, hiding. I didn't think anyone would ever stand with me. Ethan's voice softened. You're stronger than you think. You've survived things most people couldn't, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. Lyra met his eyes, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her gaze. Thank you, she said quietly. Before Ethan could respond, the ship's console beeped, signaling their arrival at the coordinates. Outside the viewport, a massive structure loomed, a derelict space station, ancient and half consumed by the void. This is it, Lyra said, her voice tinged with both awe and unease. Ethan studied the station, his jaw tightening. Whatever's in there, It's important enough for people to die for. Let's hope it's worth it." As they prepared to dock, Liara felt a strange mix of fear and determination. The message in her mind had brought them here, but what awaited inside the station was still a mystery. And for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. The derelict station loomed before them, a silent giant in the emptiness of space. Its metal walls were scarred by time, and faint cracks in its surface hinted at battles long forgotten. Ethan guided the ship into a docking bay, his movements precise and careful. As the ship settled with a soft thud, Liara unstrapped herself, her gaze fixed on the looming structure outside. "This place feels heavy," she said quietly. Ethan nodded, checking his blaster before slinging it over his shoulder. "Let's find out why it's so important." The air inside the station was cold and stale, the faint hum of dormant systems the only sound. Liara walked beside Ethan, her steps light but deliberate. Her instincts told her danger could lurk around any corner, and after everything they'd been through, she wasn't taking chances. The coordinates led them deeper into the station, past broken corridors and rooms filled with ancient equipment. Finally, they'd reached a sealed chamber. A console beside the door flickered faintly, its screen caked with dust. Ethan wiped it clean and turned to Liara. "Think you can get this open?" Liara stepped forward, her fingers moving over the controls with practiced ease. The screen lit up fully, and a mechanical voice crackled to life. "Identity verification required." Before Ethan could ask what that meant, Liara's eyes widened. "It's tied to me," she said. "Try it," Ethan urged. Liara hesitated, then pressed her palm against the console. A faint light scanned her hand, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the room was stark, illuminated by a faint glow from a pedestal at its center. Upon it rested a small, cube-like device, its surface etched with intricate patterns. "That's it," Liara whispered, her voice filled with awe. Ethan approached cautiously, his blaster ready. "Let's hope it doesn't explode." Liara picked up the device carefully. As she did, the room seemed to hum, the patterns on the cube shifting like a living thing. Suddenly, a hologram projected from the device, a figure of a regal-looking alien woman with piercing eyes. The hologram spoke in a language neither of them understood, but as it continued, the device emitted a soft tone, and the words began translating. "To those who find this message, the truth of the Empire lies within. Their power was built on lies, their strength on stolen worlds. The key to their downfall is here. Use it wisely." Ethan frowned. What does she mean? Stolen worlds? Liara's grip on the device tightened. The Empire conquered dozens of systems, enslaving entire populations. If this device holds proof of their crimes, it could destroy their hold on the galaxy. Ethan's mind raced. Which is why they wanted you silenced. This isn't just a message, it's a weapon. Before they could say more, the sound of boots echoed from the corridor behind them. Liara turned, her eyes narrowing. They found us. Ethan pulled her behind cover as blaster fire lit up the chamber. The operatives from the station had caught up, their weapons trained on the duo. "We can't let them take it," Liara shouted. "We won't," Ethan assured her, firing back with precision. The fight was fierce, but Ethan and Liara had learned to work together seamlessly. Liara used her agility and quick thinking to outmaneuver their attackers, while Ethan's steady aim kept the enemy at bay. When the last operative fell, Ethan turned to Liara, who was clutching the device protectively. "We need to get this to someone who can use it," he said. Liara nodded, her expression resolute. "And make sure the Empire pays for everything they've done." As they returned to the ship, the weight of their discovery settled over them. The device was more than just a tool for justice. It was a chance to change the galaxy. Once on board, Ethan set a course for a neutral system where allies could help. As the ship soared into the stars, Liara looked at him, her violet eyes filled with something new. "Hope. You didn't have to do any of this," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "I told you, Liara, You're not alone anymore." For the first time, she smiled back. It was small, but it was real. As the ship disappeared into the void, they both knew their journey was far from over. But for the first time, it felt like the start of something bigger, something worth fighting for, together.